A lot of society focuses it on just the conversation of men having just narcissistic traits. A lot of women have some of those traits. It's just presented completely differently. I work with a lot of male clients, and the common themes is like they'll do one thing wrong and their partner will be like, well, it's because you're a narcissist. If it's a habitual cheater, then why continue being in a monogamous relationship? There's a specific argument that you and your partner continue engaging in. I don't think a lot of people don't want to do their work, because then that means that I have to heal, and that means that I have to change. I think a lot of men are really trying to work on expressing their needs in a relationship, and then the response is like very just overshadowed or played off, or like, stop being so sensitive. There's no trust. Then it's easier to cheat.
Do you think that men cheat more?
I feel like
Sarah, welcome to Diary of an Empath.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. You know, I've always been a big fan of everything that you do. And so I'm really honored that you have me on here and just sharing some of the thoughts we share.
I'm excited because we've had a lot of side conversations about dating, about different perspectives that I always maybe didn't see that way. And you always kind of give me an understanding of, well, take it from a lens of this. Have you ever looked at it from this way? And you being a therapist, I know that you've seen a lot of really unique situations, especially working with couples. So I'm curious for you, when you look at the work that you do and everything that's led up to this point, how would you define your mission?
I do think just gaining that sense of understanding and vulnerability within a couple, that's what's really lacking nowadays in relationships. I think, you know, and we talk about this all the time, a lot of things are very surface level. It's so easy to maintain a relationship that's extremely surface level based. And I don't think people talk to the extent of what surface level is, because surface level can even go back to, you know, hey, my parents were this way, but never really getting into your needs or your feelings. And so I think really my mission with working with couples is gaining that better understanding, that relationship, and just having that space to be vulnerable, because I do think that a lot of people don't have that with themselves. And then they get into a relationship and they expect the other person to have that for them. And then it doesn't happen. And then it's frustration. And then it just kind of impacts this belief that I deserve, you know, no one understands me. I'm not wanted. And then it just creates cycles and cycles of conflict and behavior.
So let's talk about narcissism, because that's a heavy topic with couples and with dating. And, you know, listen, on one hand, I love that we are in a place in society where we're talking about mental health and we're talking about the toxicities that can come up in relationships. On the other hand, I do feel like this is used a lot, not always correctly. So how would you define what narcissism looks like in a relationship? And as somebody who works with couples, do you see this often when couples are coming to you?
I do think that narcissistic and just that, you know, I call it like TikTok language, or just like a lot of mainstream mental health, because I hear that a lot with not even narcissistic, just gaslighting, manipulative, you're doing all these things to me. And I do think that it occurs a lot in relationships. Narcissistic just traits are very wide. Just a lot of society focuses it on just the conversation of men having just narcissistic traits. A lot of women have some of those traits. It's just presented completely differently. And a lot of times maybe more agreed upon in society where, you know, like she's just a bad bitch and she's standing up for herself and, you know, she's not caring and she's doing all these things. But in some ways, when a man does that, then it's like, you know, he's selfish and he's not understanding, and, you know, his goals are his goals, and it's not kind of a collaborative effort. I do think it takes place in relationships, but it's very subtle. I don't think that it's that severe red flag. I do think it's very subtle. And then it comes from, you know, I just need you to understand me. This is how I am. And just it's traits of just, you know, lack of, you know, understanding, lack of cooperation, just a lot of, you know, this is what I need and you don't understand. And just kind of making this image of this person that is just unchangeable, unfixable, you know, has been through a lot and, you know, they're doing their best, just a person who's not on a sustained path to growth. I do think it does take place in a lot of relationships, but I don't think a lot of people realize that.
So are you saying like narcissism can be a spectrum in relationships? Is kind of what I'm hearing. Okay. Because I do think that there are a lot of people who have, obviously there's a lot of toxicity that is very real for some people, but I almost wonder if there are sometimes miscommunications that can be mistaken as, oh, this person's a narcissist, when in reality, maybe there are just needs that are being unmet.
For sure. For sure. I hear it a lot. I mean, I work with a lot of male clients, and a common themes is like, they'll do one thing wrong and their partner will be like, well, it's because you're a narcissist. You don't understand me because you're a narcissist. Okay, but if I label you as something and then my partner is trying to come, I always use the term like turning towards and turning away. So if my partner is trying to tell me something and I shut them down, and then I get upset when they go do their own thing or when they don't talk to me again or they're not vulnerable, then I have to take some accountability with that too, because it's so easy to label, but it's not easy to be like, okay, what is going on for you? What's coming up for you? What is this kind of cycle in our relationship that's causing you to react this way? It's so much easier just to create that space that you label, and then men don't feel safe to share how they feel or talk or all these things.
That's interesting. I think it's triggering for some people because that's why I can't work with couples.
Yeah.
I've already told you this. Me with couples, I get fucking triggered because if I have a couple in front of me and I hear the term narcissist and I'm seeing high narcissistic traits, to me, I automatically want to side with.
Of course.
And listen, this is why I don't work with couples, right? Because I'm too biased. But I work with so many victims of narcissist and toxic relationships and abusive relationships. God, it makes me even not want to trust. So like, how do you, as a therapist, how are you staying neutral? And, are these narcissistic type of characteristics, is it something that actually might exist, or are they putting on the face when they're in therapy?
Everyone asks me about that. And I know we talk about this a lot because sometimes I'll share with you some of the stories that I see and, just common themes. And it's like, how do you deal with that? But I do think the same way that you just talked about dealing with victims of narcissists, they are in some way trying to get better. I do think that in some ways, people who we label as narcissists or the men in those relationships, they're there in the therapy session. So what makes it not okay for them to get the same help that, for example, a borderline client deserves, where that person is, unstable in that extreme emotion, but that's okay. We label that as okay because it's like women that have came from a traumatic experience, and sometimes women who've just gone through trauma, you have the people-pleasing tendencies, you have the low self-esteem, but then no one talks about what happens when men have gone through trauma. And so then men just, who go through trauma, then continue this vicious cycle of being labeled as like an abuser and all these things, when it's not really that second hand of like trying to understand where they're coming from. And I think that's what keeps me just kind of neutral, is just understanding that both their needs are valid. And that's what I tell my couples all the time, is like, my goal is the relationship. It's not either of you, it's the relationship. We're going to have uncomfortable conversations, but it takes accountability. And I do think a lot of people don't want to take accountability.
You're doing God's work. That's all I'm going to say, because I my hat's off to you. And that's exactly how it should be. As somebody who's working with couples, you have to be neutral. And if you're not being neutral, you got to ask yourself that hard question: is there some bias or, something that I'm being triggered by? And I 100%, as somebody who is a survivor of narcissist abuse and somebody who's been like in a true narcissistic relationship, I cannot do that. One thing that is triggering for me, and that was very triggering for me going through my marriage, going through past relationships, is being cheated on.
Yeah.
And I think, and maybe I'm wrong here, and I don't know what the data shows, but it seems like a lot more women get cheated on more than men.
Mm-hmm.
And when there's a betrayal of, like, we have an agreement of monogamy, and then there's a betrayal in the relationship, do you think that men cheat more? Does monogamy exist? And how do we move past an affair? Can you?
I do think the topic of monogamy is really interesting, because I do think not a lot of people talk about it. And I really think that monogamy actually looks really different for a lot of people. I used to get into this kind of conversation with my friends where, for me, dating was actually exclusive. And now dating is like, no, I'm talking to multiple people. Like, we're not in that exclusive relationship. So then you have to change what you frame just definitions in your relationship. I do think that I don't want to go out there and say, men cheat differently or men cheat more often than women. I do think that if a person wants to do something, they're going to do it. And I do think with the conversation of cheating, I think a lot of people look at, he cheated or she cheated or they cheated, whatever it is. But I don't think they look at the 20 different reasons that led up to that. They may have been raised in a household where infidelity was very common, or with their friends that infidelity is very common, or just in society nowadays where it's so easy to engage in that. And so you have people who consider dating as liking just dating in the general aspect, that cheating starts from that aspect, or just in a relationship. So I do think that when we talk about just cheating in general, and, I have a lot of people who say, I would never be able to walk away from a relationship, or I will stay in a relationship, or that's my non-negotiable. I always tell them it just depends on what values are important to you. So for example, your value, may have been honesty and respect and just faithfulness. And so for you, if your partner cheated, that would have been the biggest no, and that's it, that's over. When another person, maybe financial, stability and just stability, and coming from a 2-parent household is very important for their family dynamics, and just having that typical family is what drives them to their actions. And so I don't think it's like, you're different of a person or you have low self-worth. I just hate this saying that like women have low self-worth because they continue to stay in relationships or they engage in certain ways. I don't think it's just self-worth. I think there's like 20 different aspects that fall into that, and we don't look at that. We just want to, like we were talking about a couple minutes ago, we just want to label. Like we just want to label. We don't want to have that vulnerable conversation, because labeling is very surface level.
Okay, so but how do we not label somebody as, if they're cheating, right?
Of course.
So if we're saying that might be surface level, what else are we looking at? I find it hard for me personally because, if somebody cheats and there's a betrayal, I've been in the past that girl who did stay. And I look back at that now and I'm like, what the fuck were you thinking?
Yeah.
Like, why did I stay for so long? And me being the person I am now, I could never.
Of
I
course.
could not. And there's no judgment to anyone out there. But do women, like, why do women, I'm sorry, I'm gonna call you guys out a little bit. Why do women stay in these relationships longer if they've been cheated on and that goes against their non-negotiable? And can we come back from that? Can trust be built? Is it once a cheater, always a cheater?
It's hard because you're talking about so many things that fall in line with a relationship. You have, for example, a couple that they just found out someone's, whether it be an emotional affair, whether it be just, like a sexual affair, whether it be just, there's so many types of affairs. It's so difficult to sit in that moment and make a decision. Sometimes maybe your partner may not be open to couples therapy or may not be working on understanding themselves. And so then it's like, I need to make the decision. Sometimes if you don't address it and then it just gets swept under the rug, then part of it is also enabling that behavior. So it's not really a conversation of this is, like I have to make a decision right now, because you may have kids. You may have, this may be this person that you've envisioned in your mind as, this is my person. This is a person I'm going to marry. This is a person I'm going to be with. We match on so many other levels. It has to be a communication of like, why did this happen? Cheating is, is not okay. It's inexcusable. But I think that we're so quick to like write off stuff and not understand what happens. Because like you said, once a cheater, always a cheater. If that person doesn't understand what's causing them to do that action, then they're going to continue engaging in the same behavior, no matter the consequences, because they haven't reflected on themselves.
I just really question if once somebody cheats, because there are serial cheaters, but I also believe that sometimes people make mistakes, especially if you're young, right? Or if you're still learning. I've personally have never cheated on anybody. I'm just a very monogamous person. I'm a double Capricorn and I'm a Libra. We like to stay very loyal, but I do think that if somebody is somebody who will betray somebody, that the likelihood of them doing it again is very high. I'm curious, you working with couples, have you seen that if they're cheating, that the likelihood of them doing it again is high, or have you seen otherwise?
In the situations with couples that I've experienced, that the conversation doesn't become focused on the cheating, because then if the conversation is so focused on the cheating, it's like that dessert that you're not supposed to eat and then you do it. It just creates so much trust, because then the therapy sessions become focused on how can I prevent my partner from doing this? And it takes a shift. And so then it's understanding, taking accountability. How can we move forward from this? What is it that we need? What are boundaries that we need to put in place? But then if you continue fixating on it, trust issues are going to happen. There is going to be trust, but what I've seen is to regain that trust, you need consistency. If I'm going to tell you to do something, I need to be able to see that you're going to do it. And then building up on that consistency and accountability for something that someone has done. But I just had the thought a couple seconds ago, if it's a habitual cheater, then why continue being in a monogamous relationship? But monogamy is like kind of the it relationship by society. So then we force people into these aspects. So then it's like, okay, if you continue cheating, like maybe think that, you know, being with one person is not it for you, and communicating that to the next person you're, you know, dating or getting into a relationship with, like, hey, listen, I, you know, prefer an open relationship, or whatever a relationship looks like for you.
I agree. I agree with that. That's what I don't understand is
why
that
aren't these conversations happening?
Why not just say that?
Yeah,
because
agreed.
there are a lot of women out there that are going to be agreeable to that, or some women who are open to that type of lifestyle. Why go through the cheating and the lies and the deceit? And knowing that you're hurting somebody, and sometimes either just not caring or just not having those conversations. And I think that's where it can be so devastating for somebody who's on the other side of that, who is being lied to. There was a documentary I just watched on Netflix. There was a website, and I had never heard of this website, but apparently it was huge, like back in the early 2000s up until even now, where it's a website specifically for married people who want to have an affair.
Are you serious?
With each other. Yes. It's called like Madison. I probably shouldn't even be marketing this for them. But so as a married person, you can go on there and you can meet another married person who also wants to have an affair, because neither wants to leave their spouse. And they just want sex or excitement or a different kind of connection. So this website is promoting that affair and essentially saying you don't have to leave your partner, and there's no risk because the other person's not going to tell on you because they're also married. And apparently the website has done very well, you know, because there are a lot of people who want to have affairs. So it makes me ask the question, can monogamy exist? I don't know what I believe anymore. I'm not sure. I think it exists more for women.
I think I'm on the same page as you, because I do think we're moving towards, you know, when you talk about cheating and everyone's like, there's just so many options. I do think it's the way that you approach a relationship. And like you said, what is it that you want? Communicating that. I don't think a lot of people communicate. I think it's like very kind of like we start talking, you know, we're, you know, liking each other. Okay, the next step is doing that. And then you never really tell that person what it is that you want or need until a conflict happens. Or you may never do and just stay silent and then internalize everything and then just, you know, suffer, whether it be from a variety of just mental health, you know, problems, because that conversation about your non-negotiables or your needs or your boundaries never takes place.
That's so true. So like I see this with women more, I'm going to be honest. And this was me back before. I would always have a hard time expressing my needs in the beginning because I didn't want to push that person away. I didn't want to come off too clingy. I didn't want to be that girl, right? So I would always not say exactly what my needs are. And then I found myself kind of walking on eggshells, because then when I did say, hey, this is not okay, then all of a sudden this person is now not interested or backing away. And I see that a lot with people who have more of an anxious attachment style. How do you think that shows up in relationships, and why are some people not expressing their needs? Is it at what point in the dating field do we say these are my non-negotiables and these are my needs in a relationship without risking that person being turned off by it?
I think it's just honesty from the start. I do think, like you said, I also struggled kind of addressing my feelings, and it was always like, yeah, it's okay. No worries. Like, you want to be that kind of just, you know, like comfortable person that everyone can not necessarily get along with, but to make you feel wanted, because then kind of addressing your needs is that not everybody is going to meet your needs. So speaking up goes against kind of that isolation aspect of it, because then your choices get narrowed. But if you're agreeable and if you're easy, then everyone wants you. And so then it's just so much harder to narrow it down and be like, okay, well, someone really doesn't want that, or, you know, I want this and someone doesn't want that. So your options get kind of a little bit lowered. Communicating is hard. And having that non-negotiable list, I feel like we need to be kind of different with how we word our non-negotiables. This value is very important for me. And I feel like this is something that I live my life by, and I would want my partner to live my, to just be with me. And that's when a conversation happens. Having non-negotiables, okay, what does that do for you though? Is there any room for compromise? You know what I'm saying? Like we talk about it all the time where, at this point in our lives where we want our partner to be able to just provide certain things for us. And some men may not be able to do that. And so it's like, this is kind of what I have, I understand, but here's what I want at the end goal. Cause I do think my mom used to tell me this all the time. And she was like, you literally kind of say things like you're the only one in the relationship. And I realized that I kind of was making my own idea of a relationship. And then if a person didn't want it, I'm like, fuck you. Like, I don't want to be with you. You're disgusting. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't want that. And so then it's understanding and having that internal insight that like, hey, listen, this is a two-way street. Like my needs are important as well, but also I'm not going to be in a relationship with myself. I'm going to be in a relationship with a different person as well.
I think a lot of people are afraid of the rejection piece of it. Like and I'm not saying me personally, I've been here, but I feel like a lot of women, and maybe some men would rather put up with the inconsistencies and the discomfort rather than the idea of being rejected or abandoned or losing the relationship. But like holding on to the things that are good. So like, yes, we have these good moments. We cuddle and this person, we have great sex and these good things that are great, but I have all of these other things that I'm uncomfortable with. And the idea of bringing them up or actually standing true to my boundaries and upholding them means that I can potentially lose this person that I'm holding on to these breadcrumbs of good things. But if you really look at the whole, there's more bad than good. So like, what are you holding on to? You're going through this relationship unhappy, your needs are not being met, and you're holding on to this idealistic view of what the relationship could be. So you're actually not even really in a relationship with the person that you're fantasizing about that you want the relationship to be, because it's not that.
I do think I want to talk about that. And I want to touch back into what you just said, because you were just talking about how does anxious attachment style work in relationships? What you just explained is an anxious person's worst fear: rejection, abandonment. And so that internal chaos and conflict that they may have grown up with in childhood manifests itself continuously in their relationships, whether it be with significant others or bosses or employee, anything. You know what I'm saying? It's just that is where they will continue finding themselves in their relationships. And so sometimes as people, you have this dream of what you want things to be. So you have this idea, just an idea of what you want a relationship to be. You may be getting that, but you may be also getting a little bit of uncomfortable stuff because you're so stuck to this dream, you stay in it. Because breaking that dream means, hey, I have to change, or this isn't okay for me. And for a lot of people, that's really, really hard. Aside from myself being a therapist, that's really hard too. Admitting like, hey, listen, it's like going to the gym and it's like, you know what? I'm going to hit legs 3 times a week and I'm just going to look so good. And then you don't look good. And then it's like, no, I'm going to continue hitting legs. I'm like, okay, well, just try to take it in a different aspect or in a different picture. It's really hard because a lot of people don't want to change.
Or they don't want to see where their responsibility is in a situation that feels like they're the victim. And I'm not trying to victim blame or anything like this, but I truly believe that even in the worst of situations, when we look back, and hindsight's always 20/20, right? That's how we learn. But there's something there that we could have like noticed in the moment. Okay, something's not right here, or this goes against my values, or this is a boundary for me. And am I choosing to still be with this person despite that I'm bothered by this? The red flags are waving in my face and I'm going to keep going anyway. Chances are there was something there that was telling you your intuition or your body didn't feel right with this person, but why did you ignore it? So that's the piece that I feel like people don't want to explore, because if they explore that, that means they actually have to take responsibility. And a lot of people don't want to do that, because then that means that they have to face their own shit. So like when we're talking about in the lens of trauma, and trauma can look different for different people, how do you see it working with couples? Does it show up differently with men versus women? And obviously we're talking about heterosexual relationships right now. How does that look differently?
Trauma for relationships is very, very interesting, because you will find there's a specific argument that you and your partner continue engaging in. And what you don't realize is that it's not the issue, for example, that, they're working a lot or they're traveling or, they don't clean up after themselves. It's kind of a lot of built up issues. And we're just focused on the here and now and focus on that one issue rather than expressing what led up to that. And also doing your own work. I don't think a lot of people, like we're just talking about, don't want to do their work because then that means that I have to heal and that means that I have to change. And so I think trauma manifests itself differently because sometimes in relationships, you will be with that, like a person will kind of parent their partner and, engage in relationships where they're still in that role. And so a lot of times when we have just trauma in our lives, we sometimes find ourselves in similar roles in our relationships. And it's hard taking accountability for that because you could be the problem solver in the relationship. You could be the person who controls everything because that's how you were. That's how you adapted. Or you could be that avoidant person and not really talk about stuff and be so afraid of conflict because when you brought up your feelings to people when you were younger, you were ignored. And so it's in little things like that. And so gaining insight of that and then understanding that this is a relationship and you're not back in that traumatic experience because you're constantly then reliving your trauma. And your cup is full just every day. And it's exhausting.
So how much of our childhood affects how we show up in relationships? And another thing that I think a lot of people don't talk about is culture and how that affects our gender roles and how we view those roles. For you as somebody who works a lot with men and women, how does that show up? Is it something that's prevalent that you see in couples that come to you?
I do think so. I think that society is moving towards now more of like an equal partnership. But I do think at times too, there is that uncomfortable conversation of where just, the female in the relationship is more open to talking about the emotions. And then the male is like, I'm providing, I'm doing all these things. I don't understand what it is that I'm not giving you. And so it's kind of psychoeducation and just talking about like, it's okay for you to express how you feel. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay that you can be making so much money and be, traveling and doing all these things, but you're not providing that emotional support or that emotional intimacy. And so I do think there's a lot of stuff. There's actually 12 types of intimacy. And when I tell my couples that, they're like really, surprised because everyone just talks about sex. And so you understand what's high on each partner's list and how they can meet that. And so I think it's just really understanding, like we keep going back to understanding needs and just communication. It just goes back to that at the end of the day.
Yeah. Gender norms for me it's hard because, being somebody who grew up in a time where we didn't have a lot of social media. I mean, believe it or not, guys, it's like for y'all Gen X or Gen Z folks, the internet has not existed for that long. We're not that old. But, we didn't grow up in that time. So men had to make more of an effort as like when I was going into the dating scene, you met people in person. Yeah. And now everything has changed to where it's like instant gratification. We're in a swipe left, swipe right generation. I feel like dating, and we've talked about this a lot, dating is getting hard. There's no fucking way that you can sit here and tell me that dating is not hard. I found it harder now in my late 30s to even find a date. Yeah. Even to find someone I'm interested in. And yes, I still, this is where I'm going to catch a lot of heat. Yes, I still expect the man to pay. But yes, I also am an independent person and I still want my freedom in a relationship. Can I have my cake and eat it too?
I think so. I really think so. But I think that it's like you're open to talking about it. A lot of people aren't open to talking about it. And I do think, again, it's just really knowing what it is that you want, communicating that and finding that. And I do agree dating is hard because then once I feel like it's just so much easier, not to be delusional, but just so much easier to kind of let a lot of things slide. And now when you find yourself knowing what it is that you want, knowing what your worth and your boundaries are, your pool gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And people are not going to react well to someone who is not going to enable their behavior.
That's a big fact. Yeah. Like it's so hard now because when you do uphold those boundaries or state what your needs are, there's a lot of people who don't want to put up with that because listen, somebody who's like truly toxic or just about the bullshit, they're not looking for someone they have to put in work with. They want easy. But that's kind of going back to that instant gratification, is I feel like there are a lot of men who do want easy access. They don't want to put in the work.
Yeah.
I feel like women are more willing to put in the work. I don't know. What do you see with that? Because that's my interpretation of it.
I think that men can want that easy instant gratification, but I do think at the end of the day, we've normed that men sometimes are not allowed or not worth getting their needs met. And so if a man already knows this, that my needs aren't going to be met regardless because they were never met through a previous relationship or through childhood, or I don't even know what my needs are, then of course they're going to go for the easy fix. It's so much easier to do that. It's so much harder to be like, you know what, sometimes when you do this, this bothers me. And sometimes, no, why are, that's complaining. Or we're just like, because you hear that. And I feel like, Keresse, you know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of women don't want a sensitive man. Like I want a manly man, but I also, I want a manly man, but I don't want him to tell me what to do, but I want him to provide, but also he can't be just too sensitive because then that's really unattractive and I'm already too sensitive. And so then it's like, okay, so then what do you want?
Right. Yeah. I personally think an emotional man is very attractive.
Of course.
But see, here's where I always ask the question, like, where is the emotional vulnerability versus the emotional intelligence or emotional availability? And this is where I think people get confused.
Yeah.
Because they are words of affirmation. They love that shit. They eat it up. Great. I do too. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have men who know what to say. Yeah. Right. And they know the things to say. Grand rising queen, whatever. Like it works for some people. But then they go through the motions with this person and the emotional availability is not there. Yeah. Just because they're emotionally vulnerable does not mean that they're emotionally available. So somebody who's dating and loves the verbal affirmation, how does someone know the difference between somebody who's just emotionally vulnerable versus somebody who's actually emotionally available?
I feel like you have to ask that question, when conversations get deeper, things like that. I mean, we're so into just asking so many questions. Hey, are you emotionally available for a relationship? Do you feel like where are your priorities at right now? Because if a person is telling you that they are not emotionally there for you, they are not emotionally available, trust them.
Believe it. Oh my
Trust
gosh,
them.
yes.
They are not going to give you what it is that you need. And so that's what we were just talking about. You knowingly sacrifice. You knowingly know that they cannot give you. And there's nothing wrong with not being emotionally available at a specific time. Maybe work is, work is your importance. That's okay. But don't lead people on and tell them that you're emotionally available and can give them what they need, because at the end of the day, you both are going to suffer.
There are a lot of times where I think that I've been in situations in hindsight where they did either hint that or flat out say it. And it's like I almost found ways of not wanting to believe it. Yeah. Right. And I see this a lot with my clients too, that there are times when that person is saying something or saying, I'm not ready for this, or I don't think I can give you X, Y, and Z. But we hold on to the idea or the fantasy of what it could be based on the good times that we have. Yeah. Like, for example, I hang out with this guy, but when we're together, he treats me like his girlfriend. But has he said that he wants you to be his girlfriend? Well, no. Okay, so then are you hung up on the fact that like the intimacy is good and are you okay with that? But it doesn't sound like you are. And so I think a lot of women stay in these relationships a lot longer than they should. And then they wonder why, I'm going to catch flack for this, but then they wonder why at the end, why they wasted a year with this person and this person didn't commit, or the person was dating multiple people. And I'm not saying that's all the time, because there are some people who straight up will manipulate, play games, and say that they're committed and do completely otherwise. But do you find that women stay in relationships longer than they should despite the red flags, or what are your thoughts on that? Did you guys know that I'm not only a therapist, but I'm also a coach and a professional tarot reader? Now, it's not exactly me hovering over a crystal ball telling your future. It's a way to connect with your guides on life issues such as career and love and spirituality. And sometimes people need one-on-one coaching to help them through breakups, toxic relationships, healing the mother wound, their spiritual path, or navigating tools as an empath. So I do all of these things to help my clients pursue life and decisions and understand themselves. So if you are interested in one-on-one coaching or a tarot reading, click the link below to get started. Okay, back to the podcast.
I was actually listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, and it was a really interesting take because they were like, we want the relationship that's like fireworks. You want the relationship where the guy is doing the love bombing. He is doing the words of affirmation. He is giving you what it is that you need. But then the analogy was like, okay, but no one wants to listen to fireworks for like 5 or 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're obviously going to end. And so in that time frame where the stuff has ended, then it's like, okay, having that accountability and realizing this may be not what I need, and it's okay for me to walk away and not continuously trying to force that firework experience because it ended.
I hear the term a lot, and I use this in my own practice too. It's like the nervous system and how if we're used to those really high highs and low lows, that can be very familiar. I used to go through relationships feeling super, super excited and high. Like, you know, this person's saying like love bombing and all these great things. But when I look back at how those relationships played out, they were never the relationships that were healthy. And you know, I don't think that I've ever met anybody who was just like balanced. So for me in the phase that I'm at in my life right now, I want somebody who is more like just more chill. I don't want I don't want someone coming at me 100% like 90 miles an hour. Like I want it to start slow. I want it to be, because I have to build that trust, and trust is not going to be built in a month, in a week, in 2 months, in 3 months. Like that shit takes time. And for you, when we talk about trust, do you see differences with men versus women in terms of how trust is built and how safety is established? And does it take men longer to feel safe in a relationship?
Trust is a really good thing to talk about because it does manifest differently for men and women, I believe. I think with women, we talk about trust of like that loyalty and kind of, you know, kind of that feeling safe to be feminine. And a lot of times we don't have that. And I do think with men, trust means saying how I feel and it not being a conflict, or saying what I need and me not being shamed or me not looked upon. I think a lot of men are really trying to work on expressing their needs in a relationship, but I think that the response is what kind of stops them from that. I mean, you know, you have someone who's trying to express to you what it is they need, or, you know, just, I don't like it when, you know, I'm not heard in these situations, or all these things. And then the response is like very just overshadowed or played off, or like, stop being so sensitive or doing all this. Then there's no trust. And that's why, again, going back to like 20 minutes ago, then it's easier to cheat.
So why do you think men cheat more than women?
I feel like I don't want to go out there and say that men cheat more than women. I think
they do. I feel like, I mean, obviously we're not going to know all the stats, but I think I can trust pretty heavily that men cheat more than women.
I think that what leads both partners to cheat is different, but I think that we always talk about, well, you know, I did this or I talked to this person because you weren't meeting my needs. And so then there's trust established on the female part because he's loyal and he's doing all these things. He's protecting you. He's allowing space for your femininity. But on the male aspect, my needs were never really met in the first place. I was never really heard. And so then I'm just going to seek a quick fix or something easy. And I'm going to continue manifesting this, you know, relationship that, you know, meets some of my needs, but also not everything.
So do men compartmentalize more, do you
Of
think, with
course.
sex?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's not even, I think it's a lot of avoidance. I think a lot of men don't know what it is they need. I think men
Mm,
are allowed to experience like maybe 5 emotions. Like, they can be angry,
yeah.
they can be frustrated, they can be happy, they can be, like crazy, like they're
Mhm.
allowed specific emotions. And then with other emotions, they're not allowed to feel that, because then it's like, what do you do with that? So then
Mhm.
understanding that, because then a lot of men, I feel like we talk about women not having boundaries. A lot of men don't have a lot of boundaries too.
What does that look like?
I feel like just continuously being the problem solver, the fixer in their relationships, whether it be with their family, just constantly having that elder role, just, a lot of, yeah, let's do it, never really understanding. It comes from something so simple like you're trying to decorate a house. And then what's the typical thing? Like, men don't even know anything about decorating. And
Mhm.
I'm just going to do whatever it is that I want. I literally see like Instagram reels about it. Like, when my, husband puts something in the cart and then it's like thrown out.
Mhm.
Okay, well, maybe that incident leads him to just not feel safe with you.
Mm.
So it's like a buildup of stuff. And then that small thing, then I'm not going to do everything. So I really think we need to be more aware of how we see a lot of men's issues, because I feel like a lot of people, just therapists and just people in general, turn their backs to that. And then again, back to what we were saying earlier, they're a narcissist. They're so misunderstanding. They don't understand women. They're so selfish. And I think that it just has to be more of an open dialogue. And through the open dialogue, then we can understand more.
I wonder too, because I think about the reasons why, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm always wondering the reasons behind why people show up the way that they
Mhm.
do. And I will agree that we live in a society that has taught men to not show emotions, that emotions are weak, and
Yeah.
I came from, being in the Marine Corps and in the Marines, like that's literally what they say. Pain is weakness leaving the body,
Yeah.
blah, 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 bullshit. And we were looked at as being weak if we showed emotions.
Mhm.
And the majority of the population in the Marine Corps is men,
Yeah.
very little women. And that is looked really bad on. And I feel like men in this society have been taught to not do that. Like being a masculine man looks
Yeah.
like being the provider, being strong, not showing your emotions. And the only emotions that you're allowed to show is like anger, excitement. You can be horny, you can,
Yeah.
you can be the aggressor,
Yeah.
but don't cry.
Yeah.
Don't cry. And if you're going to cry, go somewhere else and do it. And that is the message that if you're getting from your caregivers, your parents who you feel safe with, but are also the same people that are telling you that you're not allowed to do that, how else do you express emotion? So how do you see that those emotions are now being manifested in relationships if they're not allowed to cry and they're not allowed to show these other emotions? How is it coming out?
There's this perfect word and it's called stonewalling. And it's basically when a partner just physically, emotionally, psychologically just removes themselves from a conversation. And that's whether it be walking away, that's whether it be like, okay, yeah, you know what, do whatever you want, all these things. And so then they just emotionally shut down. They don't even know how to be emotional or how to emotionally regulate. And so then we see the extremes of like just that kind of very timid, just, I just want to be alone, to that anger where it's like physically aggressive and, throwing things and pushing things. Those are the two extremes. But then it's like, those are kind of the only two options. I can either be very verbally yelling and angry and all this stuff, or I can just be like, all right, you know what, whatever.
And it kind of goes back to childhood. I
Yeah.
feel like what do toddlers do? They throw tantrums. And so that may look like I'm going to yell and hit things and
Yeah.
make you listen to me and see me, or I'm just going to go into a corner and kind of like look back. Like, do you notice that I'm sad and I'm hurt and I'm by myself? And if people are not shown how to emotionally regulate, you kind of go back into that childlike wound of only doing what you know or what you were shown.
Of course.
And so I think what I'm starting to understand what you were saying is that not everybody who stonewalls or who yells is a narcissist. This might be what they know. It doesn't excuse the behavior, right? Because we got to take responsibility for our own shit. But there might be deeper reasons why this person is doing it.
Yeah.
I was looking at a stat when I was preparing for this interview when it comes to arguing, and over 30% of couples say they argue once a week or more, 28% saying that they argue once a month or multiple times a month, and 32% once or multiple times a year, and only 3% saying they never argue. that to me is wild because I'm single. And so I'm like very protective of my peace. But that seems like a high number.
It is, but it's very common. I tell my couples all the time, arguing is the only sometimes form of intimacy a couple has left. And so if they're arguing, then that means that, this is the only kind of intimacy that they're engaging in. And so maybe all the other intimacies, whether it be the sexual intimacy, the intellectual, the recreational, the quality time is not there. And so the only way that they can see each other or, just feel each other's presence is through arguing. And also too, a lot of people don't know how to just communicate. It's just very much arguing. And then people know each other's triggers. And so then if I know something that's going to rile you up, then I know that you care about me, or I know that this matters to you. So I feel like it's very common. And taking a step back and just being able to understand that this may not be the best, then is just what, a lot of people need to go through and learn.
So if we're trying to communicate better with our partner, so if I'm somebody who's listening right now, I'm arguing with my husband or I'm arguing with my partner, and I just cannot seem to effectively get my needs across to my partner, or they're not listening to me, or we're just not seeing eye to eye, and we were repeating the patterns over and over again, having the same arguments. Where does somebody start to work on their communication with their partner?
If you are feeling like an argument has taken place, I feel like a lot of couples have that complex where like, I need to be right or I need to win. And it's okay to say, hey, listen, let's take a break. Let's come back to this, but making sure that you are coming back to this. And if it's the same argument, then what is the underlying behavior, or what's that cycle that's continuing that? But it's okay to walk away from an argument. Sometimes as a child, it's like, don't walk away. You have to solve this. I need to solve this right now. It's okay to be emotionally grounded and in a place where you're not arguing. And so being able to have that insight and that emotional maturity to say, hey, this conversation isn't taking us anywhere. I just need us to take a 30-minute, 2-hour, 3-hour break and come back to this and really process what it is and not be defensive. But it's a way you talk to each other. If I'm going to criticize you, you're going to obviously be defensive. And so learning how to speak from your own experiences and what it is that you need. And so using a lot of I and not you.
Okay, so what would that look like? So if I'm Sarah, you're not listening to me and
I'm already going to get defensive.
Okay, so how would I rephrase that if I'm trying to communicate a need or a boundary to my partner?
I feel unheard.
Okay.
But do you see how that required vulnerability? Because it's so much easier to say, you're not listening to me. It's so different to be like, I feel unheard. And sometimes that makes me feel rejected. And when I feel rejected, I isolate and I get angry. That's so hard.
Yeah. Well, because it sounds like it takes a level of like responsibility of how I'm reacting to feeling unheard.
Yeah.
And that may not be healthy for my partner either. Yeah. So it's hard because I feel like both people have to take responsibility.
Of course.
And when you have only one person trying and not the other, it can feel very isolating and deflating. I don't know if it just feels like I'm putting in all and I'm not getting anything back. So the vulnerability component, if somebody's having a hard time being vulnerable, where can they start to unravel some of that vulnerability in their relationship?
I think really understanding themselves, taking that time. I really am a firm believer of like, do your own work. Like you have to be able to have done your own work in order just to live a meaningful life. And I really think it's just taking that step back and also addressing that some things need to change. If I continue experiencing these emotions, if I continue going through this, what can I do to help make myself feel better? And so whether it be reading that self-help book, whether it be listening to a podcast, whether it be scheduling a therapy session, whether it be having an honest conversation with yourself and saying, this is what I feel like I need and I need to do better.
I think too, sometimes we see a lot of control in relationships. And if you look at the reason why somebody is exhibiting controlling behaviors, the root of that oftentimes, in my opinion, is rejection, abandonment. I don't feel safe, fear. So what are the differences between having control in a relationship versus a boundary? Because I think a lot of people get rules and control confused with boundaries. And they say, no, I'm setting a boundary, when in reality, it's really setting more of a rule or trying to control that aspect of the relationship.
Well, there's a difference between a boundary and a barrier. So a barrier is that this is a non-negotiable. We're not moving forward from this. This is how it is. And a boundary is kind of, this is what I need, and I need you to respect that, and understanding that this is up to you to uphold. A barrier, there's no working forward. There's no growth. A barrier is you're just stagnant. You stay where you are. I'm not letting you in. A boundary, there is growth. And so I think it's understanding that difference. And I think with control, it equals safety. You know, when we engage in controlling behaviors, it's because we don't feel safe. And so then it's taking that introspective, I'm not feeling safe right now. What's not making me feel safe? So it's a lot of mindfulness. It takes a lot of work, because you have to, it's so much easier to be impulsive, and it's so much easier to just do things on the fly and then get upset that we're not getting what it is that we want. It's so much harder to take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to do one, and then one is going to lead to two, and then it's going to lead me to my end goal. It's so much harder to do that.
What advice would you have for anyone listening that is wanting to take more responsibility in how they show up with relationships? Where do they start?
I do think having that conversation with themselves and having an agreement with themselves that they're going to start doing better, and then also working on whatever is a lot of unresolved conflict or problems, or kind of addressing that, and then feeling safe enough to discuss that with their partner and moving towards more of a communication aspect. I think a lot of people talk about communication just very superficially, and it's not really deep. And I think that a lot of things that can prevent a lot of things from happening, like we were talking about cheating or something like that, is communication. If your need isn't being met, communicate that and believe that your relationship is strong enough to handle that conversation. A lot of times we don't believe that our relationships are strong enough to handle conflict, and there's such a thing as positive conflict. It's okay to express what you feel. It's okay to feel empowered. It's okay to address your needs. There's nothing wrong with that, and you're not selfish.
Sarah, thank you for doing God's work, because again, it is not easy doing the type of work that you do. And, I think it's much needed, especially when it comes to men's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Women, listen, we're biased because we are women, but I think that it's still an important topic of conversation that should not be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you for continuing to do the work that you do. And I can't wait to see where your future career leads you. Hopefully one day we'll be reading the book that you write. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.